Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the Chozen Path series of fantasy novels, of which the first book in the series is Balance of Power. Her name is Krystal Clark, and here's my interview with her in which we discuss topics including her books, mental health, and more. Krystal Clark, welcome to Apollo Papyrus.
Thank you for having me, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, my name is Krystal Clark, author Krystal B. Clark, and I am a fantasy author with a few twists on business memoirs. I also work in the data professional, and I basically come up with a company, Moving with Meaning. And it's all about building emotional resilience in various forms, from life coaching services to blogs, various podcasts, YouTube videos, and through my creative writing as well.
Without spoiling too much of your book, Balance of Power, what is that book about?
So it's essentially about building emotional resilience. So I guess let me say this. There are certain micro disappointments that we go through in life, or certain past traumas that we go through, and we try to kind of hide that, but we realize that we've manifest that into our everyday life as a way to protect us from it, as a way to get over our guilt or our shame, or to come some kind of way to numb that that kind of failure or disappointment that has happened, to numb that feeling. And so in Balance of Power, it is a fantasy, a spiritual fantasy that focuses on various characters that deal with, and in this case, the theme of the book is abandonment, and how they each deal with that, and how that impacts their decisions, how it impacts how they go about accomplishing certain things, and how society impacts that as well. So it's such a phenomenal book. The plot lines, the twists, the stories, the characters, they're all relatable. You can see yourself in each and every one of them. You can empathize in all their decisions that they make, even good and bad. So it's a wonderful book.
I'm going to add here that you made a mention that some readers will think that spiritual, not all readers are like this, but some readers, particularly if they're from a predominantly Christian country like the United States or another predominantly Christian country, will think that spiritual and Christian mean the same thing when they don't. In fact, spiritual and religious are not pure synonyms.
Correct. And it's not just Christianity, it's any other religion. So spirituality has two, if you could, spectrums. So one is about inner work, working on healing yourself, working and becoming one with nature, and improving your day-to-day life through meditation or some other mechanism or form of enlightenment, right? And the other part of spirituality is doing that as well, but also believing in the higher power, giving grace, and moving in the path of what has been, laid out for us by that great being, the universe, the one source, or what have you, however you want to refer to that. And so I didn't want folks to, because if I wanted to create a Christian book, I would have called it Christian fantasy. But this is really about the meld between faith and science. And it's bridging that gap and bringing them all together. And so in the book, there is a great being. And in this piece, this great being has realized that, hey, we're living in a post-apocalyptic dystopian society because our former selves had basically gotten too greedy, we've gotten prideful, and we've forgotten what our purpose was to live on this earth, which is to obviously enhance humanity and flourish. And so in the midst of doing that, they had destroyed their their way of life, their living. Everything was completely decimated. And so in the rebuild of society, they have put in mechanisms to, or accords is what I call, but treaties and agreements to essentially not build these particular weapons of mass destruction. And in an effort for this destruction of a society that they've rebuilt to not occur again, the great being has basically gifted this essential soul, this enlightened soul, in the form of a child. And what happens is each order is supposed to go out and try to, or each society is supposed to go out and try to find this child and raise them according to their own belief system. And as each life cycle of that chosen ends, a new one begins. So the quest is constantly going, and there's this constant balance, right, of power that is being tugged at from the greed versus the gifted.
Your book Balance of Power is part of a planned series called the Chozen Path Series. Without spoiling too much of any upcoming books in the series, what will the rest of the series be about?
So it will follow along the abandonment theme and how we deal with separation, how we deal with loss, how we deal with betrayal, and how we go about wanting something from a particular individual. So wanting acceptance, but realizing that that will never happen and being at peace with that. So, for example, one of the things that happened to me as a child was I was sexually assaulted by a family member. And when I revealed that to my father and mother, their reaction wasn't quite what I had expected. And so, again, this was a micro disappointment that I had taken with me through college, and how I dealt with that was through alcoholism. Then alcoholism started to fail me, and I could have taken many different paths, but I didn't. I decided that I was going to take the path of losing my life, for example. So something miraculously happened that I got married, and my wedding night, my son was born. So if I had taken a different path based on my disappointment and how my parents handled that, my disappointment in feeling like Atlas, right, with the weight of the world and everything and this high responsibility, this high expectation, and I had actually ended my life, I would have never been able to give birth to my three children, to become this awesome parent, and to create this incredible data professional career, as well as to finally find my purpose in life, which is to build emotional resilience. And I think that's the key point is we talk about emotional intelligence quite often. And for me, I was raised with basically emotionally withdrawn. So the way that I found my outlet was through writing. And as I continued to grow older, I started to recognize that, I have these feelings. I have them. They are there, they are real, and I recognize them. But we don't talk about emotional resilience because I was like, this isn't enough. It isn't enough to just recognize that I'm angry and why I'm angry. It's not enough and to let go. It's not enough to be sad and understand why I'm not sad or why I am sad or any of those things. It's when I'm in a challenging position and I'm feeling these emotions in that moment, how do I manage them to be logical and deliberate in the decision making process, in how I'm reacting or responding to the individual who I feel is opposing me, or any of those things. And so that is what the book is about, is just changing, just basically creating these challenging moments for individuals and going through how they're managing their emotions. And some of them let that get away with them and it peaks, and others they find a way and you find love in that. So there's love and loss, and there's also love and grieving, and there's love and needing. And it's just how we all go about that, and how resilient we are understanding that.
How do trauma and stress affect how you write books? That's not a question I usually ask, but I went ahead and asked that anyways.
Sure. I think it makes for an incredible story. If anybody has ever read a Bible, it's full of short stories, and it's It's really a message in a book. And what you see is a bunch of individuals who have been driven to some kind of vice, if you will, or some kind of path or some kind of occupation or what have you. And what ends up happening is they reach down inside themselves and say, okay, at one point, this is not working. This is not working. And what I'm doing and where I'm going is not helping anyone. It's not even helping myself. And I was on this path for myself. And so when you talk about stress and trauma, this is things that we do in day to day life. It happens all day, and we end up thinking and feeling a certain way because we're reliving our past and we're constantly trying to chase this black hole. So imagine losing a child. And this is, I know this is a deep question, but imagine losing a child either stillborn, during the conception period, or thereafter, right? When they're living and you've developed this incredible relationship, you had these future plans with them, you imagine them just being married to someone, having a bunch of kids, or just being a successful individual on their own, right? And that is taken from you. You then begin to live your life either protecting or preparing yourself for that to happen again. And this walks with you all through life. You begin to say, okay, all these decisions are being made because I am chasing a trauma. So now there's triggers, which is stress related, that happens. And what happens is, I think that in fantasy, they don't do enough character development, because we mention this trauma at the beginning and then we start talking about all these things that are happening and we're thinking, why is he doing all these things, whatever else, because we never re-mention that the trauma that he experienced before is driving him to do these things. And so we end up getting to a climactic point and the book ends and it's like, why did he do any of that stuff in the first place? Right? Because we only heard about the trauma from the beginning, but we don't hear about the lasting effects of that. So that's what really inspired me to create this book about emotional resilience. It inspired me to really delve into the interturmoil and the strain and the stress that trauma brings to people and how it truly does impact their lives.
You like to say that your books will move readers to read it twice. What do you mean by that?
Well, so I when I was writing my book, I had to read it like, you know, almost 50 times because you have to get the story right. And then when I go to editing it, the editor reads the book once, right? And then so they're like, oh, this is a great story. Like, this is a great adventure story. This is a great this and that. And then they have to read it again to add all the editing pieces. And then as they're reading it again, they're asking, why did you say this? What does this part mean? So they read it first for the adventure, and then they read it the second time to really engage with the characters, to really understand why they were motivated to do these things. So I definitely want readers to once read it for the adventure and the excitement because it's full of fantasy, and then read it a second time with a different lens and say, oh, I see why he was doing that. Oh, I understand that feeling. Oh, that's me. That's me. That character is me. That piece of that person is me. And it's one of those things where what's even with Star Wars, we watch Star Wars over and over again. So we watch it the first time, we get all this adventure, and then someone comes back and says, "Well, you know why Darth Vader did that, right?" And then we're like, "No." So they're like, well, they said it in the movie. So you go back and you rewatch the movie, and you're like, "Ah, that's why he did that." So that's why I say it will move you to read it because it's so exciting, so adventurous. But you want to go back and read it again because you want to know why all of these characters reacted this way. Why did they do that? Because if they didn't do that, things would not have happened that way. Why did they do that? So that's why I say you're going to read it more than once.
Why did it take you 20 years to write Balance of Power?
So originally I started in college, and so I started in college and I just had this idea. I just had this idea that I wanted to write this book because I wasn't getting enough out of the fantasy books that I was reading. and I didn't know what it was that I wasn't getting out of it. So I started writing, and I'm not gonna lie, that first chapter was just trash. But I was like, I'm on to something. I just don't know where I'm going with it. So I stopped and started. I stopped, and then life happened. Not only did life happen, but I stopped reading fantasy book. I stopped reading because I was like, I am not connecting with any of these books. They're not clear to me because it's just about the adventure. And to me, there's so much more to this. And I wanted it to be more of a message in a book. So I said, okay, if that's what I want to read, then I need to be the one to write it. So 20 years later, I've basically have been put blessed to be in this position where I have the time, I have the capacity to really formulate and create this ideation, create this theme, create this plot, and actually have a focus point to basically deliver the message that I really wanted to deliver. And to be quite honest with you, in those 20 years dealing, I was able to build up emotional resilience, and I use all of those examples in my book. So I don't think the book would have been as courageous, as exciting, as inspiring, as enthralling as it was without my 20 years of experience gaining emotional intelligence, learning how to be resilient in those times of challenge when my emotions were wired. And so that's why it took 20 years to create that book.
Is Balance of Power self published, traditionally published, or published via a hybrid press? And will the rest of the Chozen Path series be published in the same manner?
Great question. So this first book is self-published. And one thing that they don't tell you about self-published is that it's great because you get to be quote unquote a published author, but it's more to just writing the book. It's more to editing and doing all the interior design and all that work. It's once you get it out there, you have to push it to the right audience. So you have to market it. And the marketing phase is incredibly intense. It's incredibly time consuming. I got halfway through my sequel and had to stop and put that hold. And it's been 6 months because I can't get back to finishing that sequel because all I've been doing is trying to market my book to my target readers, branding myself, and speaking on it, and doing podcasts like I'm doing here, and writing posts and constantly promoting. So I don't know. It depends because I've had to learn a lot of hard lessons just dealing with freelancers and having to vet them. So there was some time wasted, some money wasted in that area. So I was delayed and then discouraged, and I had to build that back up. So I think in the future I may pursue hybrid publishing because of the marketing aspect only. Only. As far as the freelancers with editing, they were great freelancers with copy editing, proofreading, and also design. I can do that 100%. It's the marketing piece that I am just not as experienced with, nor do I have the time to do that and also be an author as well. And I want to retain all my rights to my book. It's my book. It's my life in the book. I want to own my rights to the book. So that's why self-publishing is the route that I plan to go. Along the way, I get with different marketing agencies to kind of vet them. So we go through that particular route there. That's why I would never do traditional publishing, I don't think.
You are a podcaster as well. You host the Moving with Meaning podcast. What can listeners expect from a typical episode of your podcast?
Oh, goodness. They can expect vulnerability. They can expect charisma, cathartic engagement. You're going to hear a lot of my personal stories. You're going to hear, and what I say is on this podcast, we talk about the things that we don't, but should. And so you get into these moments where we talk about different life coaching. You get to talk about different people who have gone through similar traumas, of various degrees, and they talk about how they have come through and become this advocate. And again, as I said, it reinforces the emotional resilience piece of this because everyone is starting to feel and understand I have emotional intelligence. But in these moments of trial, I need to be resilient. And so that is what they can expect. They can expect relatable stories. They can expect fun because I'm a gregarious individual, despite being an introvert. But in moments where I'm engaging with someone one on one and they're telling me their story and it's just that enthralling, they can expect me to double down on emotional resilience, but to also relate with the many things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis, whether it's anxiety, dealing with, again, sexual assault, dealing with addiction, dealing with being great in their career and then losing it all, and different career coaches and career transitions, how entrepreneurship works, and what to expect from that, and all the things that we uh, go through just in a day in the life of living. So it should be a safe place of comfort and refuge with a few laughs along the way.
You mentioned that you're a data professional of some kind, and what is a typical day in the life of you as a data professional like?
Oh my goodness. So my specific niche is data architecture. And now I've kind of pivoted more to focus on data analytics. So if you had asked me this maybe 2 years ago, I would say, or even 4 years ago, it would be busy, 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 like always on the go, always on the phone, 14, 15, 16-hour days because I'm working with teams that are overseas that need my attention. I'm working during the day with clients. I'm presenting. I'm being flown to Canada. I'm being flown to DC. I'm being flown to this client and presenting data intelligent material to folks that are easily comprehensible. So through that experience in consulting, I was able to gain a level of value, a level of expertise, and a level of exposure where I was able to kind of go off on my own and start my own consulting firm. And when I did that, I realized, wow, the power of knowledge that I have, the power of vocalization that I have, the integrity to deliver and guarantee high quality products. I had that. And it was easily a $250,000 business, and it could have been more. But I stopped and said, no, I want to write. And so I not only did I say I want to write, I said, well, I want to stop consulting. I want to stop moving from one place to another and settle in on a company and build their data analytics program so that they can flourish and I can be there with them as it continues to move along their journey. And so for today, I'm at just one step below a C-suite level, and I am basically leading a program and empowering teams and teaching data literacy and all of those things today. So it takes a while to get there. That's not, it took me 20 years to get to that place. It took a lot of betrayal. It took a lot of folks taking credit for the work that I did. It took a lot of work in the tech trenches. And out of that, though, what they don't realize when they put you in those positions is they're giving you opportunity, they're giving you exposure, and they're increasing your value. And that's what the message that I really want to send people is that when you are in positions where they feel that they're giving you the grunt work, the crap work, or whatever, they're actually giving you the opportunity to advance your intellect, to advance being in a particular position that is maybe not favorable. But now you have come out of it knowing I know how to do this and I know the right way to do it. And I know it because I've been there. You haven't. So that's the data life of a data professional.
Krystal, you were an amazing guest, and I thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you for having me.
If you or a loved one in the United States or Canada is considering or contemplating suicide, call 988. It could save your life for the life of a loved one. Krystal was an amazing guest, and it was wonderful to interview her. I have mental health problems myself, and it's always wonderful to talk with someone who has mental health problems like me. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your passion. Bye for now. Remember to subscribe to the Apollo Papyrus YouTube channel at www.youtube.com/@ApolloPapyrus and the Apollo Papyrus Substack newsletter at apollopapyrus.substack.com. Y'all can visit the Apollo Papyrus website at campaaronapollo.wixsite.com/Apollo Papyrus and follow Apollo Papyrus on Threads, Instagram, Facebook, and Tumblr at Apollo Papyrus. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.